Welcome to Mr. Hutchings History, where the past comes alive. Let's dive into today's story.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always ready to dig into some history.
Today, we're going back in time to Canada during the Cold War.
The Cold War, a time of global tensions and, let's be honest, a bit of paranoia.
Yeah, but we're not just talking about the big picture stuff here.
Yeah.
The USA versus the USSR, the nuclear threats.
Right.
We're going deeper.
Much deeper.
We're looking at how this whole global standoff actually transformed Canada itself.
From the inside out.
Its politics, its economy, even its art and culture.
It's all connected.
So to really get a handle on this, we've got a whole stack of sources here. Political platforms, economic reports, even some old movies and novels.
You never know where you'll find those historical nuggets.
Okay, so get this. Canada almost had its own supersonic jet, the Avro Arrow.
Oh yeah, I've heard about this.
Imagine that, taking on the Soviets in the sky. But it got scrapped.
A decision that still sparks debate today.
Big time. And then there's Quebec. They almost voted to leave Canada during all of this Cold War craziness.
That would change the map.
See, it wasn't just happening over there. This stuff was shaping life here.
Absolutely. The Cold War wasn't just tanks and missiles, it was a battle of ideas too. The US and the Soviets were each saying, our way is the best way.
Yeah.
And countries like Canada were caught in the middle. So how do you stay true to yourself when the world feels like it's going a bit bonkers? That's what we're looking at today.
So let's start with politics. Canada had two big parties back then, the Liberals and the Progressive Conservatives. Both were trying to steer the ship through these Cold War storms.
While keeping everyone at home happy, which is no easy task.
Exactly. It's like walking a tightrope.
And these parties actually mirrored the internal struggle within Canada itself. You had Louis Saint Laurent, a liberal prime minister who was all about working together with other countries, especially the U.S., peacekeeping, strong alliances. That was his style.
Security through teamwork, basically.
Right.
But then you've got John Diefenbaker, a progressive conservative who was, well, let's just say a bit more cautious of the U.S.
A bit more Canada first, you might say.
Exactly. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis in '62? Diefenbaker didn't just blindly follow the U.S. lead, even with nukes potentially on the table.
He wanted Canada to have its own say.
And this whole tension, this push and pull between sticking with the U.S. and wanting to stand on our own 2 feet.
That's a key tension.
That's key to understanding this whole era. And it plays out in all sorts of decisions, like Diefenbaker's choice to cancel the Avro Arrow project.
Now, that was a controversial one.
Some people saw it as a way to break free from American technology and give our own industries a boost. But it also had downsides economically, and some argue even weakened our defenses.
It's a tough call, for sure.
And then there's Diefenbaker's Canadian Bill of Rights from 1960. This is a huge step towards what we have today with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Really laid the groundwork.
And it was directly influenced by the Cold War fight against communism. It really positioned Canada on the side of freedom, but in our own distinct way.
Like saying, we're with you on this whole freedom thing, but we're going to do it our way.
The Canadian way.
Exactly. And this idea of doing things our way really comes into focus when Pierre Trudeau takes the stage in the late 60s. Now, he really shook things up.
Oh yeah, Trudeau definitely did things his own way.
He wanted to put even more distance between Canada and the U.S., pushing for a foreign policy that wasn't just following America's lead. He recognized China in 1970, a pretty bold move, especially since the U.S. wasn't too happy about it at the time. Trudeau's vision was peace, order, and good government, with a strong emphasis on diplomacy.
So Canada was trying to find its own voice on the world stage.
Exactly. And all this pressure wasn't just external, it was bubbling up within Canada too, especially between French and English Canada.
Right, which makes you wonder, did the Cold War make things worse between them, or was it something else entirely?
It's a big question.
To really understand this, we have to look at what was happening in Quebec.
Quebec's story during the Cold War is fascinating.
It's like a cultural awakening mixed with political drama, all while trying to figure out, who are we in all of this?
You had the Quiet Revolution in the 60s, where Quebecers were basically saying, we want to modernize, we want more control over our own lives.
And this desire for more autonomy was tied to how some in Quebec saw Canada's relationship with the U.S. They felt like the federal government in Ottawa, which was seen as very English-Canadian, was a bit too close to the Americans.
Too willing to follow their lead in the Cold War.
So they felt pulled in 2 directions.
Exactly. And no wonder this fueled the separatist movement.
Right.
The founding of the Parti Québécois in '68, led by René Lévesque, really brought this separatist feeling to the forefront. They wanted a completely independent Quebec, and they put it to a vote in 1980.
And it was a close one. They ended up voting to stay in Canada, but just the fact that it was even close.
Shows how deep those divisions ran.
Now, Trudeau's response to all this separatist talk was also shaped by the Cold War. In 1970, the FLQ, a radical separatist group, kidnapped a British diplomat and a Quebec cabinet minister.
That was a tense time.
It was the October Crisis, and it was seen as a direct attack on Canada's stability. Trudeau took drastic measures. He invoked the War Measures Act, which basically gave the government emergency powers.
Whoa.
People are still arguing about whether he overreacted, letting those Cold War fears cloud his judgment. But others say he did what he had to do to keep the country from falling apart.
Especially with so much global unrest going on at the time, it's a tough one to judge.
It is. And it's a reminder that even within Canada, the Cold War played out in different ways depending on where you were and what your history was.
For sure. But let's not forget that beyond politics and identity, this whole Cold War thing had a huge impact on regular people's lives, especially when it came to the economy.
It wasn't just about bombs and missiles. It was about putting food on the table, having a roof over your head, feeling secure. And this is where we see Canada's welfare state really start to take shape.
This is key. You see, the Cold War wasn't just about military strength. It was also about economic and social stability. The idea was that a healthy, secure population was less likely to be swayed by those communist ideas.
Interesting. So it was strategic, too.
Very much so. And it was all part of this big idea called Keynesian economics that was popular in a lot of Western countries after World War II.
Okay, so what did that look like in Canada?
Well, think about universal health care, for example. That's a core part of being Canadian, right?
Totally.
Well, the seeds of that were planted right here during the Cold War. And it wasn't just about being nice, it was strategic. A healthy, secure population is less likely to, well, revolt.
Makes sense. So the government stepped in to make sure everyone had a fair shot.
Exactly. And that's why we see this big increase in social programs during this time. Universal health care, pensions, unemployment insurance, all those safety nets that we rely on today, they were put in place with the Cold War as a backdrop. It was about solidifying the social contract, keeping everyone happy and united in the face of a common enemy.
And we can't forget about Lester B. Pearson bringing in Medicare in '66. That was a game changer. Healthcare for everyone, regardless of how much money you had. That's something we often take for granted today, but it was a radical idea back then.
Absolutely. It was all about creating a more equal society, making sure everyone felt like they had a stake in the system. But of course, not everyone was on board with all this government intervention. Some people thought it was too much, that it would lead to all sorts of problems.
Like overspending and inefficiencies.
Exactly. There were definitely different opinions on how involved the government should be in people's lives. And that debate, well, it's still going on today.
No kidding. Some folks look at Canada's high taxes and government debt and say, see, it's all because of those big government programs. But others say those programs helped build a fairer and more stable society, one that could handle the Cold War and everything that came after.
It's a complex issue, for sure. And speaking of complex, let's not forget about the 1973 OPEC oil crisis.
No.
That really threw a wrench into the global economy, and Canada definitely felt the squeeze.
Gas prices went through the roof. People were panicking. It showed how dependent we were on other countries for our energy.
Right. And this anxiety about energy security led to Trudeau's National Energy Program in 1980. This was a bold attempt to give Canada more control over its own oil and gas, but it caused a lot of friction with the provinces, especially Alberta.
Which was, and still is, a major oil producer.
Exactly. It was like a political tug of war with everyone vying for power and control. But you know what's really fascinating? Even the way Canadians learned what they studied was influenced by this whole global standoff. Universities became these unexpected battlegrounds of the Cold War.
Wow, how so?
Well, remember when the Soviets launched Sputnik in '57, that little satellite that made everyone in the West kind of freak out?
It's hard to imagine freaking out about a satellite.
But it was like, oh no, they're ahead of us in the space race.
I guess that was a wake-up call for everyone.
It was. And it led to this massive surge in funding. It was all about catching up to the Soviets and hopefully surpassing them in the tech game.
So the Cold War inadvertently created this massive investment in brainpower.
You could say that. Universities became these hubs of innovation and research, all thanks to the fear of falling behind. But it wasn't all beakers and breakthroughs.
Oh, what else is going on?
Remember McCarthyism in the U.S. where they were hunting down suspected communists?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that paranoia crept into Canada, too.
You're kidding.
Some academics, especially those with left-leaning views, were seen as potential threats.
Just for having certain ideas.
It was a tense time, and then there was this whole spy scandal, the Guzenko affair, where a Soviet clerk spilled the beans about a spy ring operating right here in Canada. It really ramped up the paranoia, even on campuses. So you had this strange mix of scientific progress and suspicion, with universities becoming these microcosms of Cold War anxieties.
It must have been a weird time to be a student back then.
It really wasn't your typical college experience, and historians still debate how this era shaped academia. Some focus on the rise of big science, where research became increasingly tied to government funding and military applications. But others emphasize the emergence of a more critical and globally minded generation of students who challenged the status quo and became active in all sorts of social movements.
So even within the halls of learning, the Cold War had this lasting impact, shaping not just what people learned, but how they thought about the world.
Exactly. But it wasn't just science and politics that were feeling the heat. Even art, film, and literature, things you wouldn't necessarily think would be affected, were caught in the crosshairs.
Really?
They were grappling with themes of nuclear fear, government surveillance, and what it even meant to be Canadian in a world that felt like it was on the brink of disaster.
Wow, we'll have to unpack that more in the next part of this deep dive.
It really is amazing how the Cold War seeped into everything, eh? Even creative stuff like movies and books.
Right. Imagine living with this constant fear of nuclear annihilation, like, what if this is it? And your government's on high alert for communist spies.
It's no wonder those anxieties found their way into the stories Canadians were telling.
It's like, even if people weren't talking about the Cold War directly, it was always there, lurking in the background, influencing everything.
Exactly. Like this film we found, The Luck of Ginger Coffee, came out in 1964.
Okay, tell me about it.
It's about this Irish immigrant who's having a rough go of it in Toronto, trying to make a life for himself, but facing all these setbacks. On the surface, it's a personal story about, well, ambition and hardship, but just underneath,
Yeah.
you can feel those Cold War anxieties bubbling up, all these questions about identity, belonging, finding your place in a world that suddenly feels very uncertain.
So it's like Ginger's personal struggles become this metaphor for what Canada was going through as a whole, trying to find his own identity amidst all the Cold War chaos.
That's a great way to put it. And it wasn't just films that reflected these anxieties. Remember that Massey Commission we mentioned earlier?
The one from back in 51.
Yeah, the one that was formed to examine the state of Canadian culture.
Okay, yeah, I remember.
They were especially worried about the influence of American media.
So they're like, hold on, we need to support Canadian stories, Canadian voices.
Right. Otherwise, they feared Canada would just get swallowed up by American pop culture.
And lose that unique Canadian identity.
Exactly. They realized that a strong, distinct culture was vital for a nation that was trying to, well, assert itself on the world stage, especially during a time of such intense ideological competition.
So what did they do?
Well, they made a bunch of recommendations, which led to a huge investment in Canadian arts and culture, including the creation of the Canada Council for the Arts in 1957.
Wow. So the Cold War, in this roundabout way, actually helped boost Canadian creativity.
You could say that. By pushing back against American influence, Canadians had to look inward and ask themselves, what makes our culture unique? What are the stories we want to tell?
It's like the Cold War forced Canada to define itself.
Exactly. The Cold War created both fear and opportunity. It led to a lot of anxiety, but also this creative surge. It forced Canadians to confront their values, their place in the world, and ultimately what it meant to be Canadian.
That's incredible. It's like this one global event could have so many different, even contradictory effects.
And historians still debate how this all played out. Some highlight that fear that gripped society, the suspicion of communist infiltration, and the pressure to conform.
Right.
While others see the Cold War as this defining moment for Canada, they say it helped shape that distinct Canadian identity focused on peacekeeping, diplomacy, and a more independent foreign policy.
Wow. So many different interpretations.
It's a reminder that history is complex, with multiple perspectives and ongoing debates, and it's up to us to sift through the evidence and, well, come to our own conclusions.
So we've looked at politics, navigated those tensions between French and English Canada, and even explored how the Cold War influenced arts and culture. It's pretty clear this global conflict left a deep mark on Canada.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that the Cold War wasn't just some far-off event, something happening over there. It was also this internal struggle, a battle over ideas, values, and what it meant to be Canadian.
Like, what does it even mean to be Canadian? That's a big question.
Right. And it leads us to another big question that we're still wrestling with today.
Let me guess.
Ah.
Did the Cold War ultimately strengthen or weaken Canada's sense of itself as a nation?
You got it. Did it force us to compromise our values, or did it help define them more clearly? These are such important questions to think about.
And there's no easy answer.
No, there isn't. But that's what makes studying history so engaging.
It's like a puzzle with a million pieces.
Exactly. And it's up to us to put those pieces together, to uncover the connections, to understand the complexities.
So what do you think? Did the Cold War ultimately make Canada stronger, or did it leave us more divided?
That's a tough one. I think, well, maybe.
It's wild, right, how something that happened, like 50 years ago can still have such a grip on us today.
Yeah, and it really shows you how interconnected everything is. Like, we can't just look at history as this list of random events.
Right.
It's more like a chain reaction.
Okay.
One thing leads to another. And the echoes, they keep bouncing around for generations.
Speaking of echoes, remember how we were talking about how even art and culture felt that chill of the Cold War?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, who would have thought that this global standoff would affect what Canadians were painting, writing, or filming?
At first glance, it does seem kind of odd.
It does.
But when you stop and think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense.
How so?
Well, artists, they're like sponges.
Sponges. Okay.
They just soak up everything that's happening around them. The good, the bad, the anxieties, the hopes, it all gets absorbed and then it comes back out in their work.
I like that. Artists as sponges. Okay, so then imagine you're a Canadian filmmaker back in the 1950s.
Okay, yeah.
The world is on edge. Everyone's talking about nuclear war. Your own government is on this, super high alert for communist spies. They're lurking around every corner.
It's a lot to process.
That's got to affect the kinds of stories you choose to tell, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you might feel drawn to these themes of paranoia and suspicion, that sense of unease that was so pervasive at the time.
Or maybe you try to explore what it even means to be Canadian in a world that's so divided by ideology.
Right. Like, where do you fit in when the world feels like it's splitting in two? It's a heavy question to grapple with.
Like that film we talked about, The Luck of Ginger Coffee. On the surface, it's just a simple story about a guy trying to make a life for himself. But underneath it all, there's this deeper layer of meaning, right? It's commenting on those anxieties of the time, those big questions about identity and belonging, the whole, search for meaning in a world that feels like it's spinning out of control.
It's a brilliant way to, use a personal story as a lens to explore those wider societal issues.
And the thing is, those anxieties, they weren't limited to just filmmakers or writers or artists. They were everywhere.
Everywhere.
The Cold War, it touched everyone. I mean, think about it. From the politicians in Ottawa to, everyday families doing those duck and cover drills in their basements.
Right. And it created this strange sort of shared experience.
Shared, but not necessarily in a good way.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was a shared anxiety, a shared uncertainty about the future. It was like this collective, what if this is it, hanging over the entire country.
Wow. Yeah. But, maybe that shared experience, even if it was rooted in fear, maybe it helped shape a sense of Canadian identity. We're all in this together facing this uncertain future. Let's figure out who we are and what we stand for.
That's an interesting way to look at it. It's like, even in the face of fear, there's this potential for growth and self-discovery. So yeah, maybe the Cold War did help to, solidify a sense of what it meant to be Canadian.
It's fascinating, right, how one event can have such a, multi-layered impact. It can bring people together, but also highlight those existing divisions.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we talked about with Quebec and that push for more autonomy, there were definitely tensions there between French and English Canada.
It just goes to show there's never one single narrative.
Yeah.
History is complicated. It's a tapestry of experiences. It plays out in different ways depending on where you are, what your background is, all those things.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting to study.
You're not just memorizing names and dates.
Right.
You're like a detective piecing together this massive puzzle.
I like that analogy.
And you've got all these different clues. Political speeches, economic policies, artistic expressions, personal stories.
And the best part, the puzzle is never really finished.
Oh, tell me about it.
There's always something new to discover, some new connection to make, some deeper layer to uncover. That's what keeps history alive and engaging.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into Canada during the Cold War, I'm honestly left feeling kind of amazed. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here, from politics to economics to culture, and honestly, it's just incredible how a global conflict that ended decades ago can still feel so relevant, so present in so many ways.
I agree. It just shows the enduring power of history, how it shapes us, our values, our worldviews, even our very identities. And that's why it's so important to keep exploring, to keep asking questions, to keep digging deeper into the past.
Because the more we understand about where we came from, the better equipped we are to navigate the challenges we face today, right?
Exactly. And to build a better future for ourselves and for those who come after us.
So, to everyone listening, keep those history books open, keep those podcasts playing.
And most importantly, keep those curious minds engaged.
Because as we've seen today, the past is never really past. It's always with us, shaping who we are and who we're becoming.
Well said.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Canada's Cold War transformation. Until next time, keep exploring and keep learning.
Thanks for listening to Mr. Hutchings' History. Keep exploring, and we'll see you next time.